Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Louisville special meeting for the City Council. Today is Tuesday, January the 24th, 2023. We have a roll call, please.
Mayor Maloney,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey,
Here.
Councilmember Brown,
Here.
Councilmember Lay,
Here.
Councilmember Most,
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you. Now we just have two discussion items tonight where we'll be giving some direction. The first one is discussion direction, Parks General Maintenance Management Plan. Director Blackmore, am I handing this over to you? All right. Thanks for the hat, by the way.
I'm glad it made its way to you. Mayor, Council, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us this evening and discussing these two agenda items. Before I begin, we do have some staff members from the Parks Rec and Open Space Department here. We have Abby McNeil, who you've met before, our Park Superintendent. We have a brand new and shiny Park Planning and Project Manager, Brian Weber, has been with us for 2 weeks. We also have Ember Brignall from our Open Space Superintendent online, if you have any questions for her as we go along as well. The first item on your agenda tonight is the discussion and direction for the Parks General Maintenance Management Plan. In late 2021, the city awarded a contract to Studio CPG and Facility Engineering Associates to review the Parks Division maintenance and operating practices. They're here tonight to give you a presentation on the methodology, findings, and recommendations as presented with city staff comment with any questions as well. I'll turn it over to them.
Thanks, Adam. Excuse me. Good evening, everyone. We're really excited to be here tonight. And this is a culmination of a lot of work on both your part and our part. And we have a pretty brief presentation. I'll keep it short. Next slide, please. Do I? Yeah, just put it on. Okay. My name is Heather Noyes, and I'm principal of Studio CPG. And we're landscape architects and planners who have, maybe in the last 5 or 7 years, had developed a very keen interest in maintenance as a way to really protect public investment. And we've seen what happens when things go south, and we see what happens when things are maintained. And it's become a very important part of our work. I'm joined tonight by Maureen Roskowski from FEA, a nationally recognized firm that performs facility and operations assessments. And we're also joined here by other staff who've contributed to the project, Rich Merrill, Peter Lusk, and Brian Pillay. Special shout out to Brian, who has really done an amazing job with data analysis, something I could never do, and he is so good at it. So thanks, Brian. Like I said, a really brief presentation tonight. I'm going to talk quickly about the timeline, an overview of the department, a one-slide overview of your department, review capability and maturity model, talk about performance standards, and then recommendations of what is in the plan. So project timeline. Just going to take a little bit deeper dive into what Adam said in his opening comments. The RFP was issued by the city way back in maybe mid-2021. And our team prepared a submittal. We were awarded the project in late 2021. And then the Marshall Fire came through, and there was a slight pause. We were very surprised and very excited that the community decided to move forward with a project in the face of such a traumatic incident. And we were under contract early in 2022, and we kicked off the project in the first quarter. 2 of the very first tasks right out of the gate were a survey that members of City Council participated in, as well as members of the advisory board. And then we performed a series of stakeholder interviews. On the heels of those two tasks, we then did a deep dive into data compilation, our data analysis, and then created drafts number 1 and number 2 late last year. And I think what I really want to emphasize, it's not captured on this slide, and what really needs to be highlighted are the changes that have occurred in this department since this project was initiated a year ago. You have new leadership in your department, and that has brought on significant operational expertise into the department. And what that means is that implementation of this plan has already been initiated. And that is both very rare in my experience and really exciting for you. A quick snapshot of the department, what's happening here. Your department is responsible for the day-to-day maintenance of 93 sites, comprised of over 350 acres, including very traditional, what we call traditional parks assets, playgrounds, courts, your athletic fields, your irrigation system, and then some not very common and what I think is what we consider unique assets to the department, which is the cemetery. The department is responsible for maintaining grounds, all the grounds associated with all your civic facilities, your civic campus, and also the urban canopy that you have. According to the horticulturist, there's over 10,000 trees that the maintenance department is responsible for maintaining. So, back to one of the original tasks, the staff engagement, and I really want to highlight this because it was a very critical component to the process, was engaging the maintenance staff in a series of staff interviews. Each staff member who participated was asked the exact same 9 questions. The questions range from what your expectations were of your department and your colleagues to what kind of equipment do you have, what are some of your challenges, and we really needed to know, in order to do the deep data analysis that was coming, what was going on in the department from their perspective. And they talked a little bit about successes, about obstacles, and about opportunities for different improvements within the department. And so again, that occurred very early in the process, about a year ago. And I'm going to turn it over to Maureen right now. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we came to this process and how we got to the results. And in order to think about the path forward, we really want to start looking at where you are. So the very first thing we did was look at where the Parks Department is, did some baselining in different areas that I'll show you. And then the next area would be to look at how do you compare. So do some benchmarking across peer organizations, some of the industry standards that we'll show you, and that helps you move to where do you want to be. And from this organization's perspective, it was improve performance and to enable accurate funding requests and be able to work towards becoming a high performance organization. And so how do you get there? That's really what our summary of findings and the maintenance plan is, really that roadmap to help you move forward to the direction that you want to get to. So in order to do the baselining analysis, we start with an organizational assessment framework that's built on quality management standards, and we've aligned that to the NRPA, the National Recreation and Parks Association, and just think of that really as best practices within parks organizations. So as we looked at that, we look at this from a high level. We look at the organization overall, but our scope was really focused in on process and really specific to maintenance. So you'll see a lot of the recommendations are focused in on that maintenance area. This analysis really helps get at not just the tactical side of very specific things you need to do, but as a broad organization, how can you improve and how can you mature as an organization? So we added to that this capability maturity model approach, which really looks at an organization's level of maturity in planning and processes and all those categories I was showing you before, and sort of rates you on this level of 1 to 5. And you can think of level 1 as kind of ad hoc, right? You don't have a lot of repeatable processes, you're very reactive. And as you start to move up this chain, you get to 2, which is repeatable. And you have processes, people know how to do them, they know what they're supposed to do, but they're not quite documented. So then you get to the next one where you're really defined. You've got defined and documented processes. And then you move up to level 4 where you are managed and measured. So you're accurately measuring. And then really the high performance level 5 is not only are you measuring consistently, but you're actually using that data to make decisions. So that's driving your decision making. So our very initial analysis really kind of put the parks organization at somewhere between a 1 and a 2. Still a very reactive organization, but as we've seen, as Heather said, with leadership and changes they've started to implement, and they're already on a path to probably more like the 2 to 3. And really the goal is to kind of get you up to that 5, right? We want to be a high performance organization, and our recommendations and this plan is really a good framework and step towards that. So to get into that a little bit more detail, some of the key findings that we had around the baselining was that current department practices, there's a lack of consistent data tracking, and facilities inventory. So there is a significant amount of effort to really look at how much is under their responsibility. What are all their assets that they have? And again, this is an area that's already significantly improved with the changes that have already happened. They're moving towards that. And you need that good data to be able to make accurate requests for funding, for staffing, to drive those decisions. So the maintenance plan kind of lays out that foundation for better asset management. And as the recommendations are implemented, you'll get to a point where you're able to do proper investment and you're really maximizing all your resources. And so, why do we care? Why do we care about maintenance? Why are we here talking about a maintenance plan? Well, the reason is that if we know that if we don't do the proper maintenance of our assets, that degradation is predictable, that degradation will occur. So all of these steps here, from operations and maintenance, your preventative maintenance, think about like oil changes on your car, all that stuff is important. Then you look towards funding major maintenance, major activities that you need, all the way through to that capital investment. And so it's important that we fund all these levels. And it really comes down to, in a lot of cases, you need to spend more now, whether that's in dollars or people, to spend less later, so that we take care of our things, our assets, and that we don't have to spend as much later on. They're not degrading early and things like that. So the other thing we looked at was performance and staffing. And in order to benchmark staffing levels, there's industry standards out there. We utilize this industry standard related to grounds maintenance, and it looks at levels of service. So these levels here you see 1 through 5 are based on that levels of service. And when we analyzed and spoke to the Parks Department, from a performance level, they were providing the level of service between a level 2 and a 3, so between moderate and high. But when we looked at them from a staffing side for that same standard, they're really staffed down a level. So they have less staff. They're staffed more at a level 3 to 4, so low to moderate. So what does that mean? It means that the staff really is overperforming, and there's a lot of supplementing with contractors as well too to feed into that. And that's good. That's a really good thing that they're doing, and it shows the level of effort, but it's not sustainable. Long term, that discrepancy between the performance and where you're being staffed at is not really sustainable long term. Another benchmark that we looked at through that NRPA again is peer data. So peers report their own data in terms of staffing, budget, parks, playgrounds, et cetera. And when we looked at that, and Louisville is right in between two of their benchmarks, between less than 20,000 and over 20,000. And really the big picture here is that you have about 4 times the amount of parks per capita with about 75% of the budget. So again, it's painting that picture that the Parks Department is doing more with less. So how do we work towards that? So our recommendations for improvement, these are high level, condensed up to kind of 8 main areas. The summary of findings, the additional documentation has a lot more detail, and the maintenance plan is really set up as a roadmap and a template so that it can get you going, sort of an implementation plan. So big picture items here, working on consistent maintenance processes, documenting those, defining them, identifying your levels of service. So those, 1 through 5, what do you want to be as a city? What do your parks, and maybe varying between your parks too. Some may have a higher level of service. That drives that data behind budget and staffing. And it also helps with the customer expectations. The customer understanding what the levels of service are and whether or not where the city is at and can meet it. Then we get into some specific maintenance areas. So having a preventative maintenance plan, the document of what maintenance you're going to do, adopting a software to help manage that workflow, and the city public works department uses Lucity, and so we've recommended that parks adopt that as well. It's really good to keep track of your data, keep track of your assets, really help that long-term asset management. Ultimately, implementing a staffing plan that's consistent with benchmarking data. As your data becomes more accurate, as you start to understand staff time for preventive maintenance, for all the things they do, you'll get better numbers on staffing. And so ultimately, you kind of want to line that up with the levels of service you want to be. And these next couple ones are related to that data. So starting to look at staff time for different tasks, make sure your inventory of your assets is good. And then number 7 is a really important one, to do some planning, resilience planning around security, emergency preparedness, and continuity of operations. It's an unfortunate part of the world we live in today that's where we're at, but looking at security specifically and emergency preparedness so that the parks organization is prepared for something that could occur at one of your parks. And then lastly, kind of big picture, implementing a performance management system. So getting to that point where you're managed and you're measuring and you're using that data to make decisions. We've identified some KPIs. There are a lot of KPIs that the city tracks. In fact, a lot more than their peers when we looked at that. But we've recommended some specific ones that we think will really help the Parks Department better manage overall. So big picture, this plan for improvement, this roadmap, all the recommendations that we've provided, and like Heather said, many have already been implemented and working towards a full asset management plan. It aligns well up with that CAPRA, that NRPA best practices for parks organizations. So by implementing the recommendations that are in this plan, you can see here all the bullets, the areas that you will align with those national standards. And again, our scope was really heavily focused on maintenance, so you'll see a lot of that here. But we also touched on workforce, because having the right skilled workforce, having good workforce development plan is really important to performance. So that's the general overview. So now we would want to open it up for questions.
Do any of the counselors have clarifying questions on the presentation? Or do you want to hold that until Maxine? All right, we'll open it up for public comment. Oh, Counselor Lay, I'm sorry. Didn't see your hand up.
I just had a question, and not so much on the presentation, but was before. It looked like from the report that there was a lot of cooperation and mining of people within the department, and there was some mention of contact with electeds. Did your folks talk to anybody on council at all during the course of this?
We did not speak to anybody on council. The communication that we received was really in the form of the survey results. So I'm not familiar with who's new on council and what your roles are, but council members were given the opportunity to answer questions, and then there were opportunities for open-ended answers, so we got some feedback that way. That
Gotcha.
was the interface that we had with elected
Understand.
officials.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now we'll go to public comment. Anybody here or, oh, so we'll go to Josh Cooperman.
Hi, this is Josh Cooperman. I live at 216 Griffith Street. On a few occasions, including when this item appeared on City Council's consent agenda, I suggested that the city have their consultant consult with the Sustainability Advisory Board. My suggestion did not get much traction, so here I am virtually tonight, as usual, to champion environmental sustainability. Or, to paraphrase the report, to pressure you to initiate and incorporate sustainability into parks operations and management. Now, I appreciate that the report is primarily focused on operations and management, much of which does not directly bear on environmental sustainability. As far as I can tell, the report provides lots of good information and recommendations for operations and management. But operations and management must be informed by the Parks Department's practices, and these practices must be imbued with environmental sustainability as much as possible. The city's parks and associated lands, like road medians and development entrances, can play a significant role in mitigating climate change and its effects if the city manages this land with environmental sustainability at the forefront. For instance, by appropriately planting more trees to increase our canopy, the city can naturally cool itself to some degree and provide more natural habitat. By replacing non-functional turf with native plants and shrubs, the city can sequester more carbon in its soils and provide more natural habitat. By continuing to move away from the use of chemical pesticides, the city can further protect not only its native fauna, but also its residents. And by phasing out gasoline-powered landscaping equipment, as I expect the city to begin later this year, the city can reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and improve its air quality. Given the urgency of mitigating climate change and its effects, I believe that we must manage the city's parklands with environmental sustainability at the forefront. Our parks are, of course, intended for recreation, and by no means do I intend to suggest that recreation be displaced in the name of environmental sustainability. But not every square foot of the city's parkland is needed for recreation. So, as the Parks Department continues to implement this report's findings, I hope that environmental sustainability will be at the forefront of its practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooperman. Anybody else on Zoom or in the room would like to speak? All right, so I guess there's no more public comment, so Council Brown.
Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I thought you were just moving. I
Oh, yeah, I just
I
dropped,
completely
dropped
misread
stuff
that.
all over. Anyway, yeah, Cynthia Korn, 438 Jefferson Avenue. First, I want to thank the council for my appointment to the Parks and Public Landscaping Advisory Board. I'm really excited to serve our beautiful city. When I read this report, it's a really wonderful time to join the board. To have this data at our fingertips, to start with that baselining, and this is all information that I geek out about because I'm a professional program director. So to come in and have all this consolidated information and a maturity model and know that the only way to go is up and to standardize our processes, and I'm just really excited to serve. I also think I would echo what Josh Cooperman said about next steps. I think that's a logical next step, and there's other things on the work plan for the Parks Board. I'm here to speak as a citizen, not for them, but the median projects and other things on the work plan are definitely designed to be sustainable. So I'm excited about the work that's been done. One of the big areas also is Louisville really is a parks town. And so this is a huge opportunity for us to have this data, share this data with our citizens. I know Adam and Abby also agree, like relative to other cities, our town, we all know this. Going through the pandemic, a lot of us discovered even more of our town, even more of our parks and our beautiful spaces. So we are a parks and open space town. So I'm really thankful that you all took the time tonight for a special session. You have so much on your plates already, but a special session for the two topics that are on the table tonight. I also want to especially thank former Mayor Stolzman for her advocacy for sustainability and the removal of pesticides in so many parks in the town, and the council for their support in those efforts after the initial pilots. And Mayor Maloney, I especially want to thank you. I know getting yours and Mayor Stolzman both wanted to get that survey and logging of all of our assets. That was something that you're very passionate about. And, we've grown as a town and we're trying to get more sophisticated, but clearly our operations were not quite there.
Right,
So
just so you're running out of time.
yeah, no, I'm almost done.
All right.
So I see that. So thank you all so much. And it's an exciting future for our parks.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I missed you coming up to the podium. If you could fill a card out for our city clerk, that would be great. They're out on the table out there. It's just the way we keep track of who makes public comment. Yep. So Helen Mosick. Here she comes.
Yes, it's Helen Moshak.
I'm
My
sorry,
address-
Moshak.
Moshak. My address is 493 Eisenhower Drive. And I am a member of OSAB, but I am speaking as a private citizen. And I just wanted to, it's wonderful. I concur that these are really important topics for us to be addressing now. And I just wanted to make a point at this point to say that I really applaud this commitment to maintenance and operations, and encourage council to think of it not just in terms of parks, but across the entire department, so that particularly in the area of open space where we have many of the same challenges, and some that are different or unique, including fire mitigation, staffing shortfalls, and increasing stress on the trails and properties, that we take this as a global approach across the department. And I'm sure that there are recreation facilities that would benefit from it also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Thank you. Oh, Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate that doing this work, and I think it's really important. The only comment that I would have is just one of format for our staff, which is that I didn't find the report terribly easy to read, or the presentation to be focused on the recommendations. For me, what was most important was the recommendations, which I think were condensed into one slide at the very end. So in the future, presentations like this, I think would be very helpful to focus less on the methodology by which you went about it and more on the recommendations themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Brown. Mayor Pro Tem.
I would also like to thank staff and the consultants for a very informative report. I would also like to focus going forward on how we're going to improve. What needs to be done? What order does it need to be done in? Who's supposed to do what? I would really like to get some kind of coordination between, as Helen said, the open space, the parks advisory boards, and include the sustainability board also, or at least one person, to kind of discuss how they can work together and complement each other's efforts instead of, working against each other. So that would be my desire.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Fahey. I'm going to make a few comments, and I have other colleagues. I don't know if they're going to make comments or not, but I actually had a few questions on the presentation. The first one was talking about staff engagement. Was there any curious things that came up from that? And I'm asking from a policy standpoint, not from an operational standpoint, but are there things that we as policymakers that are doing are barriers that you learn through the staff engagement interview process? I think that's to you, Heather.
Are there barriers? I think, and what pops into my mind immediately when you ask that question. And I think we've seen both change in personnel that has addressed this, but communication between staff, no matter what the role was, no matter what their role was in the different department, but how needs, whether they were ongoing needs, whether they were emergencies that came up, like leaks in the irrigation system, how this information was communicated. And I know that the members of staff who did raise this also acknowledged the fact that people were trying to address this over time, but that this was an ongoing concern. I'm kind of going to go all over the map here as things start to come to me.
I think you kind of pointed out, something as a systemic problem of identifying things in the field, and those were capital items or maintenance items that probably should have come before us as budget. So I think that Director's nodding his head, so that's something that should be addressed in a different way as opposed to chewing gum and baling wire, keeping the irrigation system running. And I think that Community Park was an example of that, where we went way too long. Thank you. That was plenty.
Okay.
Yeah. But I do have a couple of questions for Maureen. So the first question is, where do we want to be? How do we answer that question? As policymakers, that's a policy decision and how much we allocate as far as the budget. How do we determine that sitting up here?
Yeah, and I think, what we heard from leadership and going through this and working with other parks organization is that goal to really reach that high performance. So the NRPA CAPRA standards is really a way as a parks organization to show that you are at that maturity level, that you are a high performing parks organization. And it incorporates sustainability, community, legal, it's wide ranging. There's 154 standards to meet. So that's usually what people will strive for, whatever their industry standard is, and that's really the goal here. And I think the big picture behind that, besides reaching that or whether you go for true certification or not, is that you are at that point where you have good data, you have defined practices, and that you're managing all this in a way that you are making good decisions and that you've got defendable data to make those decisions.
Thank you. My next question is, when you're talking about the capability maturity, and it's a similar question to ask Heather about what are the political roadblocks there, and beyond funding, did you identify or will you be identifying in the future those things? Because if we don't know what they are, we can't change what they are.
I think, the capability maturity model really looks at an organizational level. So it looks at strategic planning, leadership, process, workforce, measurement. So it's a lot at the organizational level. And besides funding and resources, I don't know that there's a lot of roadblocks from a city council level to that kind of implementation.
Okay, thank you very much. few other comments that I have is my kudos are to the staff. Performance exceeding funding or staffing. I think that that is universally true in the city of Louisville. I think we have tremendous staff that are high performing. One of the things that was brought up, and it was talking about the emergency preparedness and so forth. One of the questions I have, and Marshall Fire brought this up, will there be identification of egress points that we need to be considering in some of these parks or in some of these open space areas that really are meant to provide emergency access for people who are maybe in those locations? I don't know. That's a question, Director Blackmore. But Josh Cooperman and Helen both talked about a broader perspective. I think this is really important. Whatever we do with parks as far as the asset management and getting into a maintenance plan, we absolutely want to do the same thing with open space. I think it's a very similar model, so I don't think there's any question about that. And as far as sustainability goes, it should be in everything we do, whether it's a mower for the golf course or a mower for parks, and fire mitigation is the same way. Trail maintenance, those are all, to me, very, very similar things. But I think this is a really good launching point for the next steps. I appreciate where we are, and I appreciate the work staff has done. I've been on council for 7 years, and I've been saying these things for 7 years. Now, it feels like we're gaining traction, and I'm very excited about that as well. Some of the people that are on Parks Board and Open Space Board. So, with that, I think this is a good launching point to move ahead. So, any other comments, council? So I would ask the director or the city manager, is there anything else you need from us this evening regarding this?
Not from me, no, I'm good. Thank you for all the comments and the support and the feedback. I appreciate that.
Nothing further from me either. Really appreciate the comments. And yeah, staff is implementing this already, and so this is going to be an exciting year.
Excellent. All right, we're going to move on to the next item, discussion, direction, open space and park sales tax renewal. I don't know who I'm handing this off to. Director Blackmore.
Okay, item number 2 tonight is a discussion and direction for the open space and parks sales and use tax renewal. The existing open space and parks 10-year 3/8% sales and use tax was approved in its current form in 2012. It was originally adopted in 1993. In 2002, the sales and use tax was reworded to allow for operations and maintenance of open spaces and parks. It was originally intended, as most of you probably know, as a tax for future land acquisition for parks and open spaces. This item is part of your adopted work plan as of last week, which we appreciate you taking the time and the effort to bring this item to your attention. Tonight, we are here in coordination with Finance and with the City Manager's Office requesting City Council consideration and direction regarding the sunsetting of this tax as it expires at the end of 2023 and would need to be renewed by the voters to continue.
Any questions for the director before we open it up for public comment? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Good evening.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the assist. Sherry Summer, 910 South Palisade Court. One thing I know is that the people of this town love open space. We can see that as was demonstrated in our election, where both campaigns were promoting open space, and there was a lot of support. That was an important issue in the election. I've talked to many people, and I think, as we said, this tax would be, I think, tremendously supported. And one thing I think people expect, though, is that money will be set aside for acquisition. Well, of course, we have to maintain what we have. It feels a little like money that should be set aside for acquisition is being taken up by maintenance. And so while we would like to set the very highest standards that we can achieve for maintenance, perhaps we need to take a look at how we want to weigh those two items so that we can continue to acquire more land. And as maintenance is expensive, consider the idea of acquiring land that doesn't require so much intensive maintenance, that may be closed to the public and just allowed for wildlife. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Jessamine Fitzpatrick. I live at 474 Fillmore Court here in Louisville. I'm also a member of the Open Space Advisory Board, although I'm here speaking as a public citizen because the board hasn't formally discussed this matter. Also, you heard from my fellow Open Space Board member, Helen Moshak, who is hoping to be here but is unable to attend in person tonight. First, I just wanted to thank council and staff for bringing this up early in the year and giving ourselves plenty of lead time to plan ahead. And I wanted to draw your attention to the email that I submitted that was included in the packet at the back of the packet. As I mentioned in my email, this is really a critical time for staff, council, and the related boards to be considering this measure. For multiple reasons, I think, it's an important time to follow on and relate to the parks maintenance budget, but it's also an important time because the tax will sunset this year. There are several, while everyone in Louisville, I think, does really value our open space, and we'd like to think that a measure would pass without a problem or a challenge, there are several reasons just to make sure we get it right. The first being that this is an off election year, and that means that turnout will be lower than expected in regular election years or more general cycles. There are concerns, I think, voiced by many members of the public about high sales tax here in Louisville, so just making sure that this use of taxes continues to be acceptable to people in the community. And then, of course, the high profile of open space following the fire. All these considerations mean that it's really important to get it right. And I think there's also, some opportunity as well to pursue changes to language that we've seen used consistently for the last couple of turns on this. As Adam said, in 2002 and 2012, the language was almost exactly the same. So I'm here to encourage council and staff to look toward the boards that really can contribute resources and knowledge on these topics, and then also outside organizations as well, who are experts in supporting communities as they consider passing measures related to open space and parks. And just really quickly, I know I'm almost out of time. The things that an outside resource like the Trust for Public Land mentioned in my email could help us evaluate are things like term, the amount of the tax, the allocation of the tax, to Sherry's point. And then I think finally, and perhaps most importantly, the language that's used in the ballot measure to make sure that it really addresses the concerns of the citizens and is the most likely to succeed and be passed this year. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Cindy Bedell. I live at 662 West Willow Street in Louisville. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to point out that there's different types of open space. And so I hope that the sales tax will pass and that the ballot language will encourage understanding of the different types of open space. So if you want to look at it, you can go at 4.03.010, classification and management, and you'll see there's preserve, protected, visitor, and other. So out and around town, I hear people talking about mowing the open space, a lot of worry about fire mitigation and so forth. So I just wanted to speak up for habitat preservation. So for example, if you look at open space preserve, it says land under this classification is characterized by a moderate to high level of relative ecological importance with lower levels of habitat fragmentation. And what's important here is a sufficient buffer area to permit successful management of open space preserves. So you can go to that and read all the different classifications. The second thing I wanted to do is just mention there are a lot of resources out there for innovative thinking, for creative partnership, for acquisition, and innovative programming to help the city save money to purchase more acquisition. So for example, I sent you all a link to the Great Outdoor Colorado, GOCO. Grants are coming up, and I think the deadline is very, very soon. But I saw some really exciting, innovative grant application opportunities, and it can be acquisition, and it could be programming. So I know last year when I spoke with them, they were really focusing on underprivileged populations. And I think with Louisville recovering from the fire, that may give us a kind of a hands up and grant application. We may have some special needs for parks, rec, and open space in our fire recovery. So I think that's all the time I have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to the people who are in on Zoom. So Mr. Cooperman.
Hi, this is Josh Cooperman again. I live at 216 Griffith Street. Primarily, I would just like to express my very strong support for renewing the open space and parks sales tax. I think we, as has been said before, we all love our parks and open space, and we need a way to maintain those regions in our city. I would also just say that it'd be great if some of the sales tax could be funneled towards natural climate solutions on our parks and open space. That's all for tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Helen's up next. You still have the timer going, so I can't see who's there.
I'll make it quick. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. This is Helen Moshak again at 493 Eisenhower. And I just wanted to make the point that I think it's, as Jessamine raised, that this is a great opportunity to work with experts that might help us understand the options with different models for the tax. You know, there are models that some municipalities have employed that include splitting the tax, committing to splitting the tax between operations and acquisitions to address Sherry's point. And then also perhaps having a sunset date for one portion of the tax and then having a term sort of in perpetuity for the other to recognize that operations and maintenance are a lifetime commitment for our facilities and our community. So I think there are also some real good potential options when we're working with these experts to having community involvement, conducting a survey that communicates and educates with our citizens so that we can understand their priorities and make sure that this tax and tax language and addresses those. And I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? I saw you this time.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Mayor and Council, I think I just want, this is Cynthia Korn, 438 Jefferson Avenue. Wanted to reiterate the common values. There are very few issues that divide our community. So, and I think to echo what Sherry Summers said, both sides of a tough issue actually agreed on the value of open space. And I think the presentation tonight also reiterates how proud we are of our parks. Communicating with our citizens, we can't forget that we had a measure fail because it came across in the communications as a blank check. The initiative that would have funded some underpasses and other things, but it was left very open-ended. And so the citizens are an engaged group. And so getting our communication for this ballot issue right, I totally agree with the other comments. I'm very appreciative to staff for bringing this forward and council for considering this in January. We need to get this right, and we need to make some changes. You know, what we've used the money for in the past may not be right for the future. And so updating our communication and using expertise that is available seems wise. So I wanted to make sure to reiterate what some of the other folks said. It's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. We'll go back to council for questions and comments. Mayor Pro Tem Fahey has her hand up.
Again, thank
Again.
you, Mayor. I will just reiterate what I said on the first topic for the evening, and that I think it's critical first to get this tax on the ballot in November and get it passed. I know it passed with a huge majority last time. I'm hoping that that happens again. And my preference would be, as I stated on the last topic, that I would like input from the Open Space Board, the Parks Board, staff, and the experts in how to word a ballot initiative, because that's critical. The words that you put on the ballot will have a huge influence in whether or not people vote for it. And so getting everybody to work together, I think, is really important. But I fully support getting this thing passed.
Thank you. Councilor Brown?
Thank you, Mayor, and I just want to concur with the Mayor Pro Tem, just saying that I really want to put it on the ballot. I want to get it passed. I fully support sort of thinking through how we can make improvements that might be beneficial, but more importantly, I don't want to put the program at risk, and so I want to make sure that we continue to maintain the level of funding and service that we have, and so I'll be interested to think about the kind of community support that we have for different changes to the program. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Lay?
Yeah, thank you for good discussion so far, and I thank you for the public comments because they're very helpful. I think this is, I too want to see the measure pass in the fall, and I want to, I think, make sure that we write the right measure. What I mean by that, I think, is a measure that gets, frankly, a lot of input, not just from experts and pollsters. I think we need to do some polling on this because that's one of the things that didn't happen because of the time pressure on the underpass issue, and I think it was something that we don't want to leave to chance this time, because usually, it's, I think, commonly thought that you really need above a 65–70% approval in your polling to be comfortable that you're going to get something passed. We have a lot of different variables to consider here. There's the amount that goes for acquisition versus the amount or piece that goes to maintenance. There've been a lot of concerns about maintenance raised in the wake of the fire, but before that too. So I think those discussions are really good to get a lot of public input on. I think Cindy Bedell's comment about the different kinds of open space, I think this is an opportunity always to provide good education to the community. I think the mayor has these numbers, I just bet, but we have an enormous jewel in our community of open space right now. It's interesting to see, both in open space and parks, just how much responsibility we're putting on the shoulders of staff, and some of the limits that we're placing on them. And in order to do that, some of what I would imagine when we have contractors doing work to try to fill in where we can't work with staff, that's an expense that I know you all are looking at and evaluating, and we'll continue to do that. I think one thing that I haven't heard is any discussion about equity issues. I think one of the things that there was a person who was on one of the boards and commission who called and thanked me for saying something about this last time. But my daughter does a lot of work in the area of outdoor education, particularly for first generation potential college students and at-risk kids out in California. And there are differences across communities at how much access people have to the parks and open space. It may not be as much as you might think here, but certainly with respect to folks with disabilities, I think we need to incorporate that into some of our discussions and thoughts and priorities for how we figure this going forward. But I think the other thing, and it's a very difficult issue. I've watched for as long as I've been back to Colorado from when I was doing schooling, the price of housing in Boulder are just going through the roof, and I don't think there's any question but that the amazing open space that we've come to love in Boulder County generally, and in Boulder in particular, has helped to limit the space to be able to do affordable housing, to be able to expand or house the people for workforce housing or anything like that. I think that's one of those things that needs to be in the mix too, because although we love our open space, and as we've said, there have been really the tax has passed with high margins for a long time. I don't know how this gets integrated, but I do know that people out there in Louisville are concerned about it, and it's just something that we've got to pay attention to in a way that maybe we didn't before, because that is a priority of our council. We're talking about affordable housing, and it's not to say that we would have to choose between, but I think in terms of resources and money that's being raised through taxes, that'll be something that I think people will ask. But very much interested in preserving the open space that we have and acquiring where appropriate. And I think that when we're talking about which groups or which boards and commissions to seek input from, I think the ones that have been mentioned are good. I think seeking broader input, not just from the boards and commissions, but from the community at large and particularly some of the folks who may not be as well represented, for whom adding open space may prove to be a little bit more of a challenge to their ability to get housed here. So, it's just a question. It's one more thing to put in the mix in crafting a really good proposal. Thanks to staff, and I'm looking forward to this rest of this discussion.
Oh, Councilor Most.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to be really clear. I'm listening to all the comments, and I mostly agree with everything that my fellow council members are saying. I'm just a little concerned about what Council Member Lay was talking about. I don't want to get into a situation where we're trying to talk, somehow affordable housing is getting convoluted with open space. Having a lot of parks and having a lot of open space, as one of our residents said earlier, like, we're a park city. Like clearly from the presentation we got earlier, we have more per capita open space and parks than most communities. And that not only makes us an amazing community, it provides a ton of accessibility for low and moderate income people because they have access to parks and open space that don't cost them anything directly to use. Yes, it's built into our tax structure, which is really important because it supports those kind of resources and facilities for everybody, regardless of income, regardless of socioeconomics, regardless of what who they are, what lifestyle they have, whatever. So I just think it's really important. I don't want to start trying to set this up as somehow, in order for us to make the investment that the community wants us to make in these really important resources, that means somehow we're going to have to take away from something else, because I just think that's the wrong perspective. I think these resources, these facilities make us a more inclusive community. And there was a comment about making sure our parks and our playgrounds in particularly are inclusive. And I think that's really important. But this is something that really adds to our ability as a community to be open to everybody, to be accessible to everybody. And yes, we need to think about that as we're planning our resources going forward. But I think it's really important to think about that as an important asset and service for everyone that lives here.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to say that from what I'm hearing from all of the council members, is an agreement that they want input from various groups to decide what's important, what should go in this ballot question, and how it's going to be done. I agree that it should be parks, it should be open space. I think it should include sustainability and EDI. We've been talking for a very long time about including EDI issues and sustainability in every decision the city makes. And so this would be one of those opportunities to have a group together that includes representatives from those groups that can help us understand what is really needed, what would be best.
Thank you. I'm going to take this opportunity to put my ideas on the table. I think that we universally support the idea of putting this on the ballot, so we don't want it to sunset. Because if we do that, if you take a look at the financial reports, and thank you, Director Blackmore and Deputy City Manager for Davis for working on that, and the staff that did that. But we're talking about millions of dollars over 10 years that are supporting both of these operations, parks and open space. And without that funding, that ground would go fallow. I, for one, when there's not snow on the ground, am out riding my gravel bike all over the place. And so I'm on the open space into Broomfield and Erie and everywhere else where all the trails connect. And, I see a lot of people from town doing that. And so this is an amenity that's highly valued by the citizens of Louisville. It's amazing. We're at the 30th anniversary of the first time there was a tax measure on this. And so open space predated that. And so this is a legacy. This is something that's very important. As Councilor Lay said, yes, I know the numbers. Our website says we have 2,000 acres of open space, and we have 5,000 acres in the city of Louisville. 40% of the land in Louisville is open space. That's amazing. So we want to continue this. I think we all agree. The reason why we're talking about it tonight is we need to do something, and we want to do it the right way. And we want to do it with enough time because we need to get to the point of sitting here on the dais and talking about the ballot language in June. So in order to do that, I'm going to propose that we launch a task force, and we need to include, I believe, 2 people from the Open Space Board, 2 people from the Parks Board, and I had 1 person from Sustainability. It sounds like my colleagues would like to have a member from an EDI member. We don't have a task force on that right now, but But this would be a task force that would take all that input. You know, what we have in the staff report today is a great starting point. You know, one of the things that we as a council passed in December of 2021 was some changes to the financial policies, recognizing the need for, as mentioned, acquisition. And so it's really taking a look every year at our fund balance, our general fund balances, and doing an allocation of that. And Councilor Brown was part of that discussion where we haggled in the Finance Committee for probably an hour. But it was really coming down to how do we do this? How do we make sure that we have available money and a mechanism for acquisition when those things become available? So I think all those things need to be addressed. And so I would like the council support in launching a task force. It's something that I have the energy to lead, and I'd like to ask the Mayor Pro Tem to join me on that. But this would be open meeting, so we're not going to do anything that's outside of the public realm. So my colleagues from council or any citizen could be part of that process. But I think, as Councilor Brown was saying, we got to do this the right way that it gets passed. And honestly, if we took the ballot language from 2012 and put it on the ballot, I'm convinced that it would get passed. But is that the exact thing we want to do? I think we need to take the ample amount of time, do the homework, and to come up with what we believe is actually the very best ballot language to put this in front of the citizens in November. Councilor Most.
Sorry, slow on the draw, unmuting myself. I just appreciate, Mayor, your suggestion. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm really excited about the idea of making this an inclusive task force. And I also want to really thank Mayor Pro Tem for just reiterating how important it is that we are threading and weaving EDI and sustainability into this task force along with everything else we do. I think this is something we're going to have to be continually reminding ourselves of this year, that we have to continually bring these perspectives into everything we do. That's how we demonstrate our commitment. So I'm really excited about this. I think it's the right way to go. And I just appreciate your recommendations and suggestions.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Councilor Lay?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think that having a task force like that will be a really good way of getting out there and both doing some of the education stuff that needs to be done and really getting good ideas from the community about what they're willing to support, because that's going to make things so much easier. In many ways, the task force that we did on the rec center remodel was a good example of how that built some steam. And it built steam partly because we got good input. We responded to what people really wanted and what they were concerned about and not. And there were disagreements. There were a lot of disagreements in some of the discussions, but that's okay. It's better to have those teed up right away, because a lot of those things can either be resolved or they can be balanced against one another. So good idea.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? So do we generally agree? We will have it the task force? All right, that's what we'll do. So Director, City Manager, any questions, concerns, amendments?
One clarification, I assume that your desire would be to ask OSAB and PPLAB and LSAB to select who those representatives would be. Assuming that's the case, then we can work with our liaisons to get that on their agendas over the next couple, 3 weeks, I think, is when that can happen. And I can work with you and the Mayor Pro Tem as far as schedules and that type of thing. On the EDI representative, I'm thinking about how we do that without having a task force in play right now. We will have a lot of definitely staff resources allocated to this effort. I'm really hoping that we have an EDI person on board really soon. If that's the case, I could definitely bring that person to the table as a staff resource to at least bring that lens. And then maybe as that evolves, we may end up with something different there as far as people we could bring in from the community on that perspective. So that's kind of where I'm thinking maybe we go with that piece right now.
Yeah, well, I think you're addressing the intent. And so that's what's most important here.
Okay, great.
One question that will come up if we do follow that process of selecting through these next upcoming board meetings is time commitments and frequency of meetings. So just curious if you had given any thought to that with this idea, or if you'd like to establish that later.
Yeah, I mean, this is guessing. But, you know, I think if you just look at the staff reports you put together, there's probably a meeting or two getting everybody up to speed of what it means. And add in the financial policy that no one understands is probably a 20-minute conversation. So, you know, my thinking is I ideally would like to see the first meeting in February, if possible, and probably a couple, you know, meetings every couple of weeks until we get to a point where it's going to require more staff work, and then we can address things as we go from there. But you know, to say I have it scripted out would be, but I think there'll be several meetings. I mean, one of the questions in my mind is this something we have to do in the evening, or can we do it during the day when we have all the staff resources? So that's a question, and that'll be dependent upon who gets selected. I would like to see the boards do the selection of the members who are going to serve on the task force. I don't want us up here picking names. You know, I want people that the boards believe will represent the board.
Realistically, I think we're probably talking about a couple hours of meeting, a couple meetings, like every 2 weeks, at least for a couple months or so, if not 3 months. And then it may taper off after that.
Right. I mean, the goal would be if we get to a point of polling, that would probably need to be done in May before it comes back to council in June. So it is a compressed time frame, so it's good we're talking about it in January. Councilor Most.
All right, my cursor is just eluding me tonight. The one thing I would like us, you know, I completely agree with you, Mayor, that we should allow the boards to make the selections, but I would like to give the, I don't know whether it's an instruction or request or a suggestion that the boards think about EDI in the process, that we get not just representatives from each of these boards, but that we try to select people that are representative of our entire community, so that we're doing our best to include that. You know, not obviously a mandate, but again, this goes back to what Mayor Pro Tem said, that, you know, we have to start thinking about this in everything we do and make sure that it's top of mind, because if we don't, then it doesn't happen.
So working with the liaisons is, I mean, it's not only EDI, but it's also sustainability, right? So we just need to make sure that that's part of the message. Okay. I don't know when their schedules are, the open space and parks, but I'm hopeful you can get that on their next agendas for discussion.
Yes, PPLAB packet is due tomorrow, and OSABs is due next week. And so this will work just fine.
Awesome.
So this item will need to come back with a resolution to formally appoint the task force, so you can look for that in probably, depending on the timing of appointments, one of the meetings in February for formal adoption.
Can we put that on consent? Okay. Councilor Lay.
Yeah, one thing I didn't catch, you may have said it and I didn't hear it. How big do you anticipate the task force being?
Well, initially, I thought it was 2 people from council, 2 people from open space, 2 people from parks, and 1 from sustainability. That would be the task force. And then, you know, I would encourage anybody who wants to participate, come for the public part of the forum.
To the point about EDI, would you be open to flexing that number a little bit if?
Well, what the city manager says, he's hoping that the EDI manager person is going to be here in the time frame, so it segues in, so we have that staff resource as part of the resources?
Yeah, I think the only question is, it's great to have staff, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. And it may be fine to have somebody, to just invite people from the community. But it may also be worthwhile to at least consider one of the folks who's, who served on the task force last year, or who's expressed an interest. That's my only thought, because I think there's something different, particularly because a person who is coming in to do EDI will be on staff as opposed to somebody from the community, but also that they're going to be new. And there's just been some concern that I've certainly heard that, we're not doing enough to involve citizens in providing that. And I
Yeah,
just
so-
pose the question.
Well, so, we have open space parks have boards. Here, we don't have a board. So we'll take that under advisement. And city manager?
Yeah, I am in communication with members of the former EDI Community Task Force. They call themselves a DEI action group these days. It's I think a subset of that overall group. I'm happy to communicate that with them and let them know that these are open meetings and encourage them to send representation. So at least on an informal basis, we can get those folks, engaged as an opportunity. So I'll do that.
Councilor Lay?
One other thought is, because we did talk about earlier on the impact of the fire, and I'm glad that we went ahead with this study too. I think, it's one of those things that's really important, and we certainly wouldn't have wanted to get behind in being able to start the move toward the ballot issue in the fall. This report is really helpful to get us going on that. But I'm wondering whether another potential constituency that might be worth plumbing would be fire survivors. Just because I know that there are, particularly on the open space piece of it, at least some concerns, some thoughts that some of those folks have. I believe that the city manager has sort of weekly or biweekly meetings with a group of that's kind of representative of the fire survivor group as a whole. So that might be worth having that person represented as well.
Well, I hope that all of these are representative. We also have the youth. I can think of different populations out there, and I think it's our job as a task force and as a city to communicate, to make sure everybody is getting an opportunity to engage. And so, while we look at open space and the Parks Board and sustainability, there's pseudo staff, if you will. They're working, working as advisors to council and closely with staff. So that's a little bit different role than some of these other groups we talked about. So, I think it's important to have a small enough group that we can be agile and work quickly, but also making sure we get all the points of input. So, Councilor Most, do you have another comment? And then
we have
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Fahey is a fire victim. So
There you
if
go.
she's going to be involved, then we have that perspective. And I think she's done a great job of balancing her role on the council with her role as a citizen who is impacted by the fire. And I really appreciate her perspective that she shared over the months, and I assume she will continue to do that.
Thank you. Let's let the Mayor Pro Tem speak for herself.
Well, thank you for the very kind words, Councilor Most. I just wanted to make sure when you were mentioning
getting this on the agendas for the advisory boards, that Adam can take care of parks and open space, but who is going to contact the Sustainability Advisory Board? Okay, that's lovely. That's all I was curious about.
Are we missing anything, Director, City Manager? Do you feel comfortable with what we're doing here?
I do. I think this is good direction. I think it gives a great platform to have these conversations and really work through what you all talked about as far as what the right question is. And I really look forward to providing all the support that we can that you need for this process.
Any comments, Director?
The only comment would be aligning the times with the resolution, the times of the Sustainability Board and how that would relate to adoption of, or selection of the two, and it has how it gets onto an agenda for you and what that timeline would look like for your first meeting. But we can work through that.
So what are you thinking as far as timing, maybe the 21st?
I think we would have to wait till the 21st because Sustainability Board, I don't believe, meets till the 15th.
Okay, so we will schedule a meeting soon after the 21st. It would be the first meeting. So we'll work offline with that. So is council good with our direction here? All right. So any other comments before we wrap up for the evening? All right. I love doing this. Adjourned.